blooming in Japan, and as per the Red Bull was blooming fast. But there's still plenty of action to talk about. Welcome to the Grid Talk podcast, and today we are here to review the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix. My name is Louis Edwards, and joining me today we have fellow Grid Talk co-host Owain Medford.
Hello.
F1 writer Jawad Yaqub.
Hi.
And from AHGP, we have Aaron Harper.
Hello.
But before we get into the episode, we must, of course, thank our sponsor, Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. Bet Online continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting from your favorite casino and card games, available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code LEAVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, where the game starts. So, we may as well talk about the big red flag in the room, Owain. Lap one, it was clean for the most part, and then next thing you know, Alex Albon is in the barrier, along with Daniel Ricciardo, and it was a bit of a scrappy start from Ricciardo, just basically from lights out until the incident.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of went backwards, really. He didn't have an amazing start, and obviously he shouldn't really have been. I mean, it's reasonable that he would be sort of kind of sharing the same track with Alex Albon, but obviously Albon got a fairly decent start, and unfortunately they sort of all jammed up, and to be honest with you, for me it's a bit of a racing incident because Albon's on the far right of the track, as is his right to be, and Daniel Ricciardo moves right. Really, I don't think he intended to. He just didn't check. He didn't expect Albon to be there, and of course it's had the worst of the consequences. But I don't think there's any sort of blame to apportion here, really.
No, it was really a weird one, and I kind of want to get all your opinions on just this opening incident. So, Jawad, Daniel Ricciardo, he's got a lot of pressure on him. You were making comments in our Slack group throughout the weekend that often Liam Lawson would be popping up on screen every time something didn't quite go right for Daniel. But for someone who's trying to slay their demons, this is not the way to do it.
No, not at all. And, we've all kind of attributed this incident as a racing incident. It was lap one, cars everywhere. Ricciardo, I guess, caught unawares. He was looking to his left to the inside of the corner and trying to cover off Lance Stroll, and then completely was blindsided by the fact that Albon was coming around the outside. But, the question I pose is, should Ricciardo have been in that position anyway? He made a terrible start. He was kind of swallowed up there on the medium tyres and just looked a bit rattled. Ricciardo, we've seen him in the past. Typically, he's a really good starter and he's got more awareness than he did. And yeah, the pressure has got to be there too. The fact that his teammate again has upstaged him, and of course it was a home Grand Prix for his teammate this weekend, which we'll get to a bit later. But they've denied that there's going to be any change in the driver lineup as early as Miami, as what the speculation or the rumors were saying. But there's going to be a new chassis for Ricciardo in China, and RB have said that the chassis change is not because Ricciardo thinks it's cursed. It was a planned chassis thing, but maybe is that going to be his last chance to say, well, it's is it the car or is it me kind of thing? But at the moment, he's not in a good place, and it's really sad to see because we thought that perhaps getting that second lease on life with the Red Bull family and then going to RB would reinvigorate him, but we're kind of just seeing the shades of McLaren like we did in 21 and 22.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's definitely need to a swing of luck, especially maybe the likes that his teammates getting at the moment. We'll touch on Yuki Tsunoda later, but Aaron, sort of on the flip side of this accident, of course, it wasn't just Ricardo involved; it was Albon too. It's back-to-back weekends where he's had a big crash. This time he wasn't allowed to get back in the race, um, but you got to. If you're James Vowles right now, you're going to be going slightly berserk. There's another car sort of gone down the drain, and they already said they don't have another chassis for China, so this is going to have to be another repair job.
Yeah, it's another repair job for the team, and like you've got the knock-on effects of this. Obviously, there's no points scored in this race. There's the repair bill for it, but this is all money that then comes out of the cost cap that they can't put in developing the car. They've said already the car isn't where they want it to be, and because for one reason or another, the drivers keep ending up bringing it back in two or three or several bits. That's money that's being spent on making parts that they need to replace and not parts that they can improve and then make the car go faster. And obviously, they're on the back foot with the chassis situation with only two chassis available just outright. And that's not a good position to be in because, as we saw in Australia, if one gets damaged and you can't repair it, you are fielding one car, and that slashes your chances of scoring points literally in half. So Williams are very much on the back foot at the moment, and James Vowles has got some work to do to steady the ship. However, I don't think he will be overly concerned because he's already said, speaking on different podcasts, that this season he doesn't care about it. He doesn't care about 2025. His priority is 2026, getting the infrastructure in place within the team and making sure everything is up to scratch. And in some ways, this is kind of beneficial to his argument because he can go to the owners, Doralton Capital, and say, look, we need to invest big time in the facilities, the factory. We need to do X, Y, Z. And then this team can start from the base that it needs to. And then we can avoid these sort of situations where we look a bit silly and the car comes back in two pieces. And it's not a very good look for anybody. So there's obviously short-term pain, but I think there will be long-term gain out of the entire situation for Williams. So in some ways, it strengthens their position, sort of everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's out of all the toughness, there's a clear, I think there's definitely clear calls for how they can improve, and definitely maybe not using Excel is and is one of them. So Owain, we'll go up to the next sort of team. We may as well wrap Sauber all into one. It was pretty uneventful. Zhou retired not far into the race with I think they said it was gearbox issues. And then Valtteri Bottas in 14th, he was battling for much of that race. He was, either overtaking or being overtaken. He was on a bit of a separate strategy. But for Bottas, P14 is a pretty forgettable step in this Finman saga.
Yeah, I mean, it's just for me, it's another poor result for Sauber. It's fairly good, but it's a net position loss. And bearing in mind that Daniel Ricciardo was ahead of him, he at least should have, for me at least, you'd take the free extra position if he's doing a good race. He'd be finishing at least, kind of in the points if he could. This was the prime opportunity. Just stay out of trouble, get the strategy right. You get that free position and then maybe battle up. Unfortunately, I think it's just so hard for Sauber to do that because I believe he had a poor pit stop as well, or it's still way off the pace. I mean, we're talking 200, 300% longer than a standard F1 pit stop. And it's just the kind of thing that it needs to be stamped out. I mean, obviously the gearbox issues you can't really sort of account for. Sometimes those crop up. But yeah, the lack of performance in the race, as much as you may be battling, but it's kind of in vain, really. So for me, it's and there's a certain amount of it where you can't really, it's the easiest thing not the easiest thing in the world. It's obviously not the easiest thing in the world, but sorry, it's the cheapest time you'll ever get is by cleaning up your pit stops. I mean, that's funnily enough, that's something that was put forward by Audi and is clear to every race team. But yeah, it's something that they need to get on top of, and I understand that there's probably an issue there. You know, they've got to test some reason. If it was, you know, it must be some academic mistake and they'll be kicking themselves. But yeah, it's not an amazing performance for me, and I think they're really being held back operationally as well.
Yeah, I think that's clear to see. I mean, their pit stops are terrible. You know, we had Crofty praising their pit stops. Oh, you know, 6 second pit stop, that's not bad. Yeah, but when the rest of the grid are doing 2.3, 2.4 second pit stop, you're losing 4 seconds in the pit stop every single time. And that's a lot in track position. And it's really not good. Jawad, we have already talked about Albon and a bit about Williams, but we should talk about Sargent, who did finish this race. Well done him. However, didn't end it in the best way. You know, he was doing all right. He was getting those moves done. He was, you know, being competitive with the Alpines and the Saubers, but then had a lock up into Degner too, and that was kind of the death note of his race.
Love the reference there, Louis. Yes, we saw a better outing from Sargent. I guess all weekend he had been performing quite well, even though he was out qualified by Albon. But in the race, we saw a couple of overtakes. Of course, it was outside the points, but still, you know, good for his confidence after missing Australia. And also getting to grips with this different chassis, because ultimately he's using Albon's patched up chassis from Melbourne, while Albon has or doesn't quite have the shiny new chassis anymore that Sargent kept out of the wall last time out. But you know, for him to then go and kind of ruin his race with the lock up into the Degners, as he said, and into the gravel. I mean, it was lucky for him he was able to reverse out and keep going. But I think a few of us on the Slack chat were like, oh, I hope that it could have brought out a safety car just to spice up the end of the race. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one for Sargent. Like, I remember feeling so dejected for him in Melbourne with the way things had turned out. And it's almost going to be like he's going to carry that chip on his shoulder for the rest of the season. It's almost like he's on borrowed time there. So does his performances really matter? Is they going to save his career or anything like that? So I think, you know, we're probably just going to have to look at it more from a Williams team perspective, that he isn't going to cost them too much in terms of the repair bill. But, you know, it was encouraging to see what he did early on in the race. But, you know, then I guess he just kind of succumbed to the pressure later on.
Yeah, it was kind of a shame. I think he really did need a good race to really bounce back after everything that happened in Australia, and then yeah, it was going as probably as well as it can do for Sargent until the end. So Aaron, you get to draw the short straw this week and talk about our wonderful French team that is currently driving around the back of the grid, Alpine. I mean, 15th and 16th doesn't sound so bad, but when you realize there's three DNFs and Sargent who went off, it's really, again, not very good.
I think not very good is putting it generously. This is a team. This is a works team that has dropped the ball and then fallen over the ball and is doing that cartoon roll with the ball down the hill. So they are just completely spiraling out of control. There seems to be no leadership at the team, and today was just like epitomized everything that's going wrong with the team. The car wasn't fast, the strategy wasn't right. The best thing you can say about Alpine is their drivers are good drivers. They're both race winners, and if you give them a good car, they will do the job for you. But right now, they are being anchored down with like every ounce of gravity in the world, and they just cannot drag that car any higher than, you know, last and second last at some points. It's so bad for them. And of course, they even contacted each other at the start. Fortunately, they stayed in the race, but there's always that undertone of they're not particularly friendly considering that their upbringing. So yeah, you're just waiting for them to to sort of turn on each other. And instead of it just being, oh, everything is terrible with the car, everything is terrible with the car, and the drivers are now infighting. But I think they're mature enough to realize actually there's nothing to be gained from that. So yeah, there's nothing really more to say. They didn't get their strategy right. They tried to do the hard strategy. Then I think they put Gasly on mediums, but because they're so far out of the picture, you're not paying attention to them. They're not relevant in the story of the race. They're just there. They're a back marker. They might get in the way. They might hold Verstappen up for half a second, and then he'll just get DRS and extend his lead even more or something crazy. But that's the role that they're playing. They're just back markers. And at the moment, they're not really contributing anything to the show.
Yeah, it's everything they throw at the track, every attack they try to do is just not very effective, and it just blown away. And it's it's really not that great. And I only say not that great because I'm not allowed to swear on this show. Otherwise, there would be some quite fruitful language that would be I could say about Alpine. So Owain, we'll move on to Haas. Nico Hulkenberg, P11. I mean, it's not too bad, and Kevin Magnussen, P13. Um, I'm honestly not really sure what to say. I know Stroll was really on a absolutely fast one at the end, and yet Hulkenberg still managed to finish ahead. And Magnussen P13, it's more or less what you can expect from Haas this season.
I'm actually going to go on a limb and say that Kevin Magnussen, that's one of the best races of that they've had in the tenure, really. He started at P18. And has finished P13. I know that's obviously not points, but that's still a massive position gain. And the sort of with the competitiveness of this midfield, particularly the back half of it, as we've seen, there's a few gimmies in there with the Alpines and things like that. But apart from that, I think it's a great race for him. And it's one of those things you can imagine that a P13, and I can't believe I'm celebrating a P13 in the P11. As much as it's not points, when there's teams out there that are not scoring points, you want to be at least as high up there as possible. And actually, I think this might end up being, if they can continue this, one of their sort of most successful seasons. I thought it was a great performance from Kevin Magnussen. Gave us the Hulkenberg obviously gave us the best camera angle of the kerfuffle between Ricciardo and Albon there. But apart from that, I don't think they really did anything wrong. And I think one of the things that you can take from this race, at least, is that as much as this is a high deck circuit, as we saw many a time, and it very clearly did cause issues. I'm not saying that they've got on top of their tyre deg issues that they've had in the past, but at least it's to the point where they're not backing into people behind, and I think that's some of the positives you can take is that you didn't back into people behind, clearly got the strategy right with Magnussen, and Hulkenberg. As you go further up the field, it does get harder, and I think they did to be honest with you, quite a good job.
I mean, it's definitely for me, it was Haas was kind of right where I kind of expected them to be. They did a very good job in Australia, and I kind of expect them to be where Alpine should have been, and Alpine are kind of where I thought Haas would be this season. Just Komatsu was not very not very positive with what his expectations for this season. I think they were expecting to be much further behind than they were, but they have built a much better package, I think, than they were expecting. And well, we've already touched on how bad Alpine have dropped the ball that is the size of the planet, really. So, Jawad, I guess we could talk about Aston Martin now. Lance Stroll, P12, of course, didn't have a brilliant qualifying yesterday. They did bolt a set of soft tyres on the end to try and maybe catch Yuki Tsunoda, but that didn't work. And then Fernando Alonso in sixth, doing what he's done since he came to Aston Martin and wiping the floor with Lance Stroll and getting every single bit out of that car that you can possibly get.
Yeah, pretty much. And we saw Alonso again applying his usual wily craft towards the end of the race, with Russell and Piastri behind him as well. And I think, ultimately he benefited this time. It was almost similar to the situation we had in Melbourne a few weeks ago. And, ironically, he finished again ahead of Russell on the track, but keeps the place this time. For Stroll, though, look, he's another driver who I guess shouldn't be in the position that he is in terms of, that car can achieve so much more, and to be eliminated in Q1. And then, yes, he made some flashy overtakes during the race and complained a bit about having a GP2 engine out there, which, if he's still around when Honda come to Aston Martin in a couple of years, please don't do that at your home race. You don't want to be given the kibosh like Alonso did from Honda back in the day. Yeah, so it's hard to really praise Lance for getting up to 12th, because he shouldn't be in that position to begin with and on the fringes of the points. So, but Alonso again doing a great job, and it's great to see, because coming into this season I thought firmly that Aston Martin kind of fell out of that top 5 battle, or they'd kind of be 5th on their own in no man's land, whereas they're very much in there with Mercedes and McLaren at the moment. They're still ahead of Mercedes, I believe, in the Constructors' Championship. I could be wrong, but it's very tight in terms of the points. So, I think what's ultimately going to cost them, as it did last year, is the lack of contribution coming from Stroll's side of the garage, unless he can, of course, turn his form around. But in these early races, Alonso is taking that Aston to Mercedes and McLaren and to Ferrari to an extent. So they can be pleased about, the top 6 result today, beating both Mercs and McLaren. But, again, it's the other side of the garage that is going to be a bit concerning, and they're going to feel a bit let down by his performance.
Aston Martin actually sit 1 point behind Mercedes.
There you go. The 1 point that Stroll could have got potentially, they'll cost them when it comes to the end of the year.
Yeah, Mercedes currently sits on 34 and Aston Martin on 33. Yeah, it's very close in that between those two teams. But yeah, things definitely need to start looking up for Stroll. He's he's had a lot of times where he's qualified poorly, but he's come back in the race, got some good points, had some good performances, but this just really wasn't one of them. And I think he'll definitely be scratching his head and wondering just why he was nowhere near Fernando. And hopefully that he can improve and start contributing some more to the team. Aaron, Yuki Tsunoda, hometown hero, qualified in the top 10 in 10th and finished in the top 10 in 10th. He just seems to have that one piece that Daniel doesn't have, and he's able to get so much more out of this car, be so much more competitive, and actually score points.
Yeah, he's getting more out of it than Daniel Ricciardo is, but look, let's credit where credit's due today. He finished where he started, which was 10th, and got himself a well-earned home point. But it is that consistency factor that we've been looking for from Yuki over the years. It does look like it's starting to come together. That said, there's an available seat at Red Bull, and there is absolutely no talk of Yuki Tsunoda having that seat. So it does bring home the question of what are Red Bull actually doing with this second team if they're not going to be using it to promote a junior driver. And what's Yuki Tsunoda's future in F1 if he's just going to sit perennially in the second Red Bull team? Is he going to go to Aston Martin because he's a Honda-backed driver? Who knows? But, Stroll and Tsunoda at Aston Martin? These are the questions you've got to ask yourself. Is Tsunoda the sort of driver you can build a team around in the future? Yeah, he's bagged a point today and he did a good job, but honestly, I don't see it. I know I'm being critical of him when he's had a really good day, but it's sort of a flash in the pan result, isn't it? He's had some good results, don't get me wrong. He does put some good races together and some good performances, but it is that consistency factor. I am very happy for him to go and prove me wrong in the next few races by scoring plenty of points and having some really good drives. But for his future, he needs to be doing more than this, doesn't he? Although he can't really do more because the top 4 or 5 teams are that much better than the midfield. So it's really tricky to get a read on exactly how good Tsunoda is. But I think the telling factor is that Red Bull aren't really considering him for partnering Max Verstappen in 2025. So what's his future like? He can do a good job, but is he actually going to get any further up the grid than this? That's the question I'm left asking.
Yeah, I understand completely what you mean when you said the seat at Red Bull. No, I don't think anyone is. I don't think anyone even in the F1 world would consider Tsunoda for that seat. Which, despite the fact that he's the best driver in the junior team and he's not being talked about, just goes to show that there are better options out there, not necessarily from within the Red Bull family. Signs. um, so we'll just swiftly move on, Owain, to Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton P9, George Russell P7. They tried a risky strategy today. I think that's fair to say. They really tried after the red flag, bolted on a set of hard tyres, tried to do that one stop. But that opening stint, they just couldn't get the tyres to work. They dropped off much faster than they were anticipating. And then later they had to switch to a two-stop. And while Russell was, maybe slightly fortunate to get that P7, Hamilton just really did not have the pace today.
Yeah, I mean, Russell was clearly faster than Hamilton, and that basically kind of persisted throughout the race. I mean, yeah, Hamilton was faster in qualifying, but it seems that George Russell just seems to have a slightly better handle on the car. It was in the better window, and as you say, there was no pace in it in the early stint. I think they needed to be able to stay an awful lot closer, or use their tires less, or basically just maintain. Well, not use their tires less. They just needed to sort of maintain a higher pace. We saw with other drivers up the grid that they were able on softer tires to make them last, whereas they didn't even have the longevity advantage really of the hard tires, and hards just hadn't just didn't work. Sorry, and we saw Mercedes basically admit that with going to mediums for both of them, and that was actually their most successful period. I wonder if whether they sort of they need an almost even hotter race really for the hards to they needed even more deg for the hards to work really, and it seemed that they had a better time maybe on the lower fuel load on the mediums, but I think they made that decision a bit too late, and unfortunately it was sort of they were kind of on a hiding to nothing really. I mean, you always pick the new tires as well, but I don't think they had new mediums, but yeah, it was just poor pace I think that really cost them, and then the longevity didn't serve them in good stead either, because by the time they'd done that, it was just quicker to go through the pits, take another set of tires, and make use of that much fresher, much faster rubber. So I think it's poor strategically from Mercedes. It would have been a gamble if it had worked, or they had some other kind of stoppage in the middle of the race that would have allowed them to get off them without losing too much time. But apart from that, it just left them sort of with no options to go but to concede the strategy, and I think they got left in no man's land.
Yeah, they were, during Friday practice, there was definitely some encouraging signs from Mercedes, and then even during qualifying, I think they did quite well, but it was a very risky strategy, and it just didn't pay off. And maybe if they had stuck to maybe a slightly more conventional two-stop, they might have been in the fight with the McLarens and the Aston Martins a little bit more. But as you say, that early stint really killed Mercedes' chance of scoring much higher than they did. Jawad, we'll move on to McLaren. So Oscar Piastri, P8, lost P7 on the second to last lap because of a lockup. And then Lando Norris, who was sitting quite comfortably in P3, but the Ferraris just completely erased his chance of staying there, and he's ended up P5.
Yeah, when I was looking back at how it all panned out for McLaren, it's so interesting that 6 months ago we were here and they were second quickest team behind Red Bull, and such is the development and progress that you can make during an off season that Ferrari have firmly taken over that second position mantle behind them. And of course, they're the only ones in the last 2 years who've won a race outside Red Bull. So the fact that, I think even strategically, McLaren couldn't have done any more today. It was just down to pure car performance that the Ferrari was ahead. It shows you that, there is still a little bit of work to be done, on their side. Lando did another good race. He did get, pipped at the end there, and Leclerc stayed ahead, even though he was on older tyres, I believe. And Piastri, like we said, had that lock up on the penultimate lap and lost the position. There was a bit of contact there with Russell, which the stewards are still looking into. So I wonder how long we're going to be waiting for a decision on that. As we've seen, stewards' decisions do take until, maybe a couple of hours after the race for them to come back with something. But you look at the constructors' standings and they're sitting third at the moment, McLaren. And, to have said that 12 months ago, for example, with the situation they were in, sitting last in the championship and having no points before Australia, I think it's a lot of progress. So while it doesn't seem like, McLaren are looking as flashy as they were at the end of last year, I think the way that they're scoring their points at the moment, with both cars in the top 10, they've had a podium already with Lando, and they could be in the hunt again, depending on what track we go to. It's pretty good. So, they're doing better than Mercedes and, of course, Aston Martin, who have a hand tied behind their back proverbially. So I think, overall, still pretty good result for the Papaya squad.
Yeah, it's definitely looking quite good in the Constructors' Championship. They have still opened up that gap to Mercedes and Aston Martin behind. They've kind of managed to make themselves a nice little pocket there in P3, which, as you said, 12 months ago, McLaren were sitting pretty at the back, and now they're not doing so bad. And hopefully, with some more upgrades to this car, we'll see that car ebbing a little bit more closer to the likes of the Red Bull and the Ferraris. So, Aaron, I've got a question for you. Have Ferrari retained the wrong driver?
No.
Oh,
And that sounds incredibly harsh on Carlos Sainz. I mean, Carlos did the smoothest of operations today. It was a lovely drive. He is driving fantastically, but he's also driving with a point to prove because he's not got a job next year. So he's upped his game because he needs to. This isn't to say Carlos was underperforming before, but the hierarchy at Ferrari is Charles Leclerc is the X Factor driver. He's the one that's probably going to win a world championship. Carlos Sainz is the one that would win them a constructors championship because he will be most likely to follow home with second, third, fourth, like top 5 positions regularly. That said, if you get the opportunity to sign a 7 times world champion who has got a bit of a point to prove himself at the moment, then you probably take that if you're Ferrari. You've got an unbelievable lineup. I feel so sorry for Carlos Sainz. He's done nothing wrong in his time at Ferrari, and right now he's doing everything right. I mean, if he was staying for next season, you'd be going, hang on, if they develop this car properly and prepare themselves for 25, they could put on a serious assault to challenge Red Bull for the championship. That's still possible, of course, with Lewis Hamilton in the team, but I think Charles Leclerc is their man, and he's shown on occasions that he is unbelievably fast. Like, he can pull half a second on a qualifying lap like no one else. It's sort of Mika Hakkinen vibes going back to the late 90s. Ayrton Senna used to do it. He'd just deliver the lap, and Leclerc can do it too. Over a race distance, I think they're a little bit more closely matched, and you saw today strategy slightly played a part, but I think the big picture here that we need to take away from it isn't whether they've kept the right driver or not. I think it's that Ferrari have actually got their house in order. Fred Vasseur has done an unbelievable job. The Ferrari team is unrecognizable from the laughing stock that it was 12 months ago that he took over. This is a football manager going into a relegation prospect team and finishing in the top half and then challenging for Europe. That's what I'm looking at it like in terms of the reorganization that he's put into that team and the consistency. There's no sort of fluff to it. Yeah, okay, we still get the we are checking and the whatever plan strategy they're on, but I think that's always going to be there. That's just how they do things. But they're no longer this walking, driving meme of a team that's just going to keep embarrassing itself and falling over its own sort of clown shoe size feet. Now Ferrari is ready to stand up again and be a championship challenger. Whether they can take the fight to Red Bull this season remains to be seen, but I think they'll certainly be closer. And the development they did at the back end of last season shows that they're actually ready to develop a car through a season. So I expect them to win more races this year and be closer to Red Bull, who will probably be the eventual champions. And when Lewis Hamilton arrives next year, if they do the right things again, they've got two drivers who can absolutely take the fight to Max Verstappen in almost equal or definitely equal machinery. So 2025 could be absolutely explosive. And please, Red Bull, sign Alonso so we have just like this mega star lineup at the front of the grid and then just give them equal cars. That's all I want.
So you're telling me Fred Vasseur is like Claudio Ranieri, takes over a relegation-bound Leicester side, brings them back up, and then wins the league, and then they get relegated a few years later. I don't know, I feel like it's almost fate that Carlos Sainz might actually end up at Red Bull. He's had just the longest route from Toro Rosso to Red Bull you could possibly imagine, but he'll get there eventually. So we may as well finish with the dominant force. Owain, sorry. That is Red Bull 1-2. I apologize. They were 1-2 in quali. They were 1-2 in the race. Is there anything or anyone that could really attack those Titans today?
Tom, there really isn't. There really isn't anyone. I mean, I would like to point out that it was closer. It was closer between the. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Yeah, no, it was absolutely closer between the rest of the field and Red Bull. But I don't know whether that was just them kind of not easing off, but just not going so hard. I mean, but for me, we didn't see the massive gaps, forming, and I can't believe there's a gap of only 20 seconds between Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz, where we normally see a gap of 20 seconds between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. I think it's a really good performance. I think Perez is finally doing what he's meant to be doing, which is just getting second places. I think it might be too harsh on him in Australia, but yeah, he's absolutely just doing exactly what he needs to do. Maybe the car's a bit more suited to Perez this year than it maybe was to Max, or maybe it's they're both topping out the performance of the car, and we're getting towards the end of the sort of development track they're on. But either way, they're still winning races. They're still convincingly winning races. It didn't really seem like a challenge. And to be honest, you could kind of forget they were there. They were that far ahead. It doesn't really matter. The race was all behind. And to be honest with you, that's kind of what Red Bull want. They want boring, easy races that, they drop back into the pack, which was a little bit, I think it's a little bit concerning to see that the other teams sort of just slightly moving towards it, and they weren't flying away, particularly with the strengths of the Suzuka circuit. Really does hit the strengths of the Red Bull. It's fast, it's flowing, particularly in the high speed corners, which is where we'd expect to see them romp away, particularly with the high speed downforce. But they do seem a little bit sort of closer so I think that'll be cause for concern then. Maybe they'll have to develop just like 3 or 4 more races past Spa, rather than just stopping halfway through the season like they did last time. But yeah, it's an excellent performance, and to be honest with you, I think Sergio Perez is doing everything that he can to keep the seat. I mean, obviously it's his to lose, really. If he does lose it, I'd like to see the biggest revisionist history of Carlos Sainz getting in there from the Red Bull team ever. But either way, yeah, they do it. It doesn't look like that's the case right now because he's doing everything he needs to do. He's being an excellent second driver, and I think it's a really good start to the season, despite everything being a bit closer than it was previously. So, yeah, it's absolutely brilliant from Red Bull.
Yeah, it was as you said, it was pretty flawless. Yeah, a few times that Sergio dropped behind Lando after pit stops, but Lando did pit incredibly early for both of his stops, so that undercut is very strong in Suzuka. So I think it was slightly to be expected. So we have been through all of the teams and drivers today. So the one last thing to do is to say our driver of the day. I should probably mention that the official Grid Tour driver of the day was Charles Leclerc, but let's see what everyone else has to say. So, Jawad, for you, who was your driver of the day?
I'm going with the grain here and saying Charles Leclerc. So, considering he was on that kind of different strategy and on old tyres at the end, securing a top four finish and also finishing 4 places up from where he started. Pretty good race considering his teammates been stealing the spotlight in recent races. So I think overall a good result for Ferrari, but also for Leclerc as well. So I think a podium will be around the corner for him next time.
Okay, Aaron.
I'm going to go with the chap who Jawad just said has been stealing the spotlight. Although I did vote Charles Leclerc in our Slack chat, so I'm going to give it to Carlos Sainz. I don't know if you can call having your appendix out and having appendicitis stealing the spotlight, but he's making headlines everywhere he goes at the moment. So yeah, Carlos Sainz for me.
Okay, Owain.
It's good that Aaron went for Carlos Sainz because that means I can choose Charles Leclerc without looking like I'm just going with the pack there. Otherwise, I'd have to go with Kevin Magnussen. No, he did a great job. He made the medium tires last, and to be honest, he made every single set of his tires last while still keeping the pace up, and that's what ultimately brought him so far up the field. From his starting position, which wasn't amazing. And obviously his finished position, which is overcoming his teammate. Oh no, sorry, not overcoming his teammate, but he's still in fourth, which is pretty good from where he started. Yeah,
very famously in this race didn't overcome his teammate. But I'm also gonna make it 3-1. I'm gonna give it to Charles Leclerc. It was a disappointing qualifying, but he really did make that strategy work today. Got ahead of Lando Norris, who was sitting very comfortably in P3 for much of that race, and then kind of really forced their hand, and he only could lose out to Sainz in the end. But I think he'll be happy with the job that he did today. And as just a bit of fun, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good was that race? Jawad, we'll start with you. How would you rate that race?
Give it a 7 out of 10. It wasn't a classic, wheel to wheel banger. We got overtakes. It was more like a chess game that we were watching. Just you kind of had to stay alert with all the strategic elements going on. I don't know how everyone in Europe cope so early in the morning, having to be switched on and alert, following all the strategy and whatnot. But no, it was a decent Japanese Grand Prix. I know it's not a track that overtaking is typically possible on, so a lot of emphasis is put on qualifying. But I think despite the excellence that we're seeing from Red Bull and Max Verstappen at the moment, it was quite an interesting race to follow. So yeah, 7 out of 10 from me.
Okay, Aaron.
I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. There was enough to keep us interested and awake in the early hours of the morning here in the UK. Not so bad for you, Louis, actually in Japan, or Jawad in Australia. Obviously, it's closer to tea time there. But yeah, I think what kind of made it a little bit more disappointing for me was the fact that once the new tyres went on, track position wasn't as important. Like it was too easy. I say too easy. The overtaking was easier because of the power of the undercut and fresh tires, because the degradation was so high. It did sort of make me think about the early Pirelli days where you had jelly tires, you show them the racetrack, and they basically degraded in fright of a racing circuit, which makes me think, actually, we should just bring them back and have 4-stop races. Poor Alfa Romeos, what are they? Sauber, that's what they're called now. They would be basically in the pit lane the entire race. We'd still be waiting for them to finish, but the ease at which cars were able to go past, don't get me wrong, a couple of Lando Norris's overtakes were very, very good. I think the fact that those cars didn't have to fight quite so hard to regain track position was a little bit disappointing. I thought, well, they're going to arrive at DRS, they'll find a way through. It's a little bit sort of, exactly what's going to happen. It's just waiting for the inevitable to come. So interesting race in terms of strategy, but I think it could have been more jeopardy and like more of a race, if that makes sense.
Okay, and Owain.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really give it. I wouldn't give it as low as a 6. I'd like to give it a 6.5, but I don't really believe in half marks. So I'll have to give it a 7. I'll round up. I'll be nice. I'll round up. Yeah, it was interesting enough. But I think sort of the interest came from the fact that the Rebels might have been sort of overcome and things like that. And the strategy sort of might have gone against them, but yeah, no, unfortunately, it didn't really it didn't quite sort of pop off for me. It wasn't crazy or anything like that, but it was good. It was interesting.
Okay, so that is the end of the show, everyone. But if you did enjoy this podcast, we'd love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube right now and you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification, because we stream all of our race shows. So as soon as we go live, you'll get notified and you can come join in the chat and leave us your thoughts on what you think. Grid Talk is also available on Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search for the Formula One Grid Talk podcast. If you are listening on Google Podcasts, you'll probably know that platform is shutting down. So there's plenty of other platforms that you can listen to us on. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so we can get mics, lights, and better recording equipment. And also, it just helps with general stuff. So now I will leave it over to our amazing guests for today for them to plug whatever you want to plug. So, Jawad, we'll start with you. Where can our listeners find more from you?
Thank you, Louis. First of all, well done hosting again. You can find my writing on a website called theraw.com.au/motorsport. I was lucky enough to be at the Australian Grand Prix with the media, and you can find all the content that I was able to produce that weekend on there. And of course, I live blog all the Grand Prix as well. So check that out. And also a quick shout out to Formula Talk as well. Great listen every time you've got the support races, F2, F3 and F1 Academy on. Sophia and Tom Downey do an excellent job. So getting more and more into those categories as well slowly.
Thanks for a nice little plug there. Aaron, where can our viewers find more from you?
So I am AHGP, where we're the YouTube channel where we have the best fans. It's a YouTube channel dedicated to F1 Manager videos, experiments, and live streams. I'm currently in the middle of a save with Haas, where I can only use drivers who have won the GP2 or Formula 2 championship. And I have finally got Nico Hülkenberg his first podium. So that's the first mission ticked off the list. Hülkenberg on the podium, and it came with the British Grand Prix as well, so it couldn't have been sweeter for me. So if you're watching live on YouTube at the moment, I'm going live later this evening with McLaren, where we haven't been able to upgrade until Austria, and the target is to beat their 2023 tally of points. So we've got to Austria. We're now allowed to upgrade, and hopefully we can start scoring some points. So lots of good fun and yeah, good vibes.
Okay, Brett. Nice. And Owain, where as a fellow Grid Talk co-host, where can we find more from you?
You can't necessarily find anything more from me, but I would recommend checking out the social channels for the Grid Talk podcast at Grid Talk UK. That's where you can keep up to date with any of the day-to-day goings on the show, any news or updates. Or on, we didn't have it this time, but if red flags go any longer and we have to make any changes to the podcast times, then you can find us at Grid Talk UK on all of the social medias with the app.
Thank you, Owain. That saves me a job of having to do that. So we will be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Of course, the preview for the Chinese Grand Prix return to Shanghai in not very long. So thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online. Goodbye. Okay, so we will go into a short post show just because we have got quite a few comments, a lot of them from Jared. Thank you, Jared, as always. But also a few more. So we'll start at the sort of top, and we'll go back to Alpine. And Jared has asked, "Is it time to bring back Cyril?"
Maybe time to bring back Flavio.
Do you know what? That's funny because I replied to his comment saying time to bring back Flavio, but I think Aaron would disagree.
I don't want him back in the paddock, to be honest.
No.
I have my own opinions on him, and of course he was fairly central to the race fix in 2008, which, you know, Felipe Massa has a bit of a bone to pick about. So yeah, Alpine, the whole, like, for years and years and years, French manufacturers have come into Formula One and tried to do it on the cheap, and they keep getting found out. So honestly, their best solution is to sell to Michael Andretti, and then we have Andretti on the grid, and then he can start rustling some feathers. Audi will turn up, and all of a sudden, all the big teams have to pull their fingers out. So yeah, that's my solution.
And yeah, like I put in the comments as well, I don't think the problem is the team principal as such, because we've been through that many since Renault returned as a works team in 2016. And of course, Cyril was there famously in that time, but it's overall the management from above. We're talking about, you know, Luca De Maio, the CEO of the Renault group, ultimately, and Alpine as well. Like Aaron said, it's the commitment from their side. They think they can just do things on the cheap, and that doesn't necessarily work for a manufacturer team. So until they can sort that out at the top, which, let's be fair, probably is not going to happen, let's just, you know, sell the team to Andretti and let there be people on the grid who actually want to be on the grid and competitive.
Yeah. Jared also going up with a comment, isn't it great for F1 that we have 10 competitive teams and we're not watching second-rate teams like Andretti or Rodin wasting space? Obviously, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference, but it's very true. Like when you've got teams that are so poorly run, like Alpine on the grid, and you know the fact that they had so many engineers just walk out, like chief engineers walk out at the start of the season because they just have absolutely zero faith in what the team's doing, and it's just crumbling down. You know, Alpine have always set themselves really high expectations, even before that when they were Renault. It's like, we're going to be third, we're going to be fourth in the fourth, we're going to be third in the constructors, we're going to eventually title. And they come into every season with such great expectations, and they end up just flopping and falling every single season, whether it be drivers not performing, whether it's the team just being generally terrible, whether it's the management just being awful. It's something always seems to happen at that team, and this year they are having their worst season despite having a very strong driver lineup, and it's just horrible to watch. And the sort of the best way I can say it is just it's awful to watch just this team just completely capitulate.
In 10 years, they've gone backwards. That's fundamentally what's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In 10 years, after what 2 5-year plans, they've gone straight back to the bottom of the grid. Like that's what's happened. I don't know how. I don't know how you manage that. Like they are, it's a works team. Sauber are better, and they're a privateer. Williams haven't been this bad.
And to think as well,
2019 springs to mind for Williams.
And to think as well as a power unit manufacturer as well, who have been on the grid since day dot of the hybrid regulations, and they're still the worst power unit supplier on the grid. Like as much as Honda copped it, when they first came in, they turned things around and they're the best now, so they can turn things around pretty quickly. Yet Renault just seems to be continually chasing their tails, and obviously we can't make much improvements at the moment with the engine freeze and whatnot, but it gives me a little hope anyway for 2026 when we will have these regulation changes on the power unit side because of what they've done or the lack of achievement that they've had in the previous 10 years.
Well, they're only in F1 because they're told they need to be. So I think it goes back to like 2018 where they were still partnered with Red Bull. Christian Horner and Adrian Newey went over to visit them. I can't remember who the president of Renault was at the time, but basically he turned around and said, yeah, I'm only in F1 because it's apparently good for marketing. But what they're doing now is not good for marketing. This is bad for business. And the thing is, to rebrand to Alpine, you go out on the street and ask the everyday person if they know what an Alpine is, and they'll tell you it's a mountain or something. They won't know it's a racing car or a sports car brand.
They'll ask you why you're pronouncing it wrong. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. So if you
mean Alpine?
if they'd left it at Renault, everyone would know what you're on about. It's a recognizable brand, but they've shot themselves in the foot with their marketing, and now their actual cars are doing terribly. So yeah, it's bad in all forms.
Alpine are a car audio system. That's what I know them for.
To be honest, I will say that my next door neighbor when I lived in the UK did have an Alpine, an actual Alpine sports car.
5 people.
Yeah, you see a few of them around. I remember seeing what was it? It was an Alpine / Renault dealership. It's on the Manchester Ring Road, on the inside of it.
They've only got the one model car, isn't it? The A110.
No. They're bringing in a new electric one based off the new electric Renault 5. Except
I can't wait for no one to buy that.
No. That was a big. They had a really big fancy launch. It was a bit weird. Actually, no, wait, hold on. I think that was for the F1 car. I mean, I'm genuinely of the opinion that I think the chassis dynamics of the Alpine A110, which is the road car, might actually be better than the racing car. Well, actually, according to Gordon Murray, that's the sort of thing that he based his new road car off. So, you know.
So Jared's actually just come up with a new comment. He said, but maybe Ryan Gosling. I think it's Ryan Reynolds. Actually,
Ryan Reynolds.
Sorry, Jared. I think it's Ryan Reynolds.
If it was Ryan Gosling, the car would be pink again.
Yeah, yeah. He said, but maybe Ryan Gosling, Ryan Reynolds, and insert other celebrities here will provide the leadership needed at Alpine. It was a very odd move from Alpine that they've got all these just Travis Kelce and Ryan Reynolds, Anthony Joshua, and random sports celebrities and actors to invest in a team.
Rory McIlroy, I think, as well.
It's bizarre, isn't it? It's just so bizarre.
Is that just Rock will be next?
The people just don't want. Is that just a sign that people just don't want to be like actual people who know and people who actually care like don't want to be affiliated with the team, that they just like, oh look, we've got Ryan Reynolds who, oh yeah, he just recently bought a football club, but now he owns a bit of our Formula One team. Seems like a
Welcome to
very
Enstone.
yeah.
It does make me
Available
feel
on
real.
Disney Plus.
It seems like an odd move because he seems to be fairly business savvy. What with Mint Mobile and
He's got an amazing deal out of Mint Mobile. That must have made him so much money.
I do feel sorry for all the employees at Enston and Viri, though, because, you know, like, yeah, they're probably happy to be getting a paycheck and job, but it must be so gut-wrenching that your work and your labor is going into mediocrity, essentially, because upper management don't want to, you know, do anything better. I mean, that's Pat Fry pretty much said that when he left Alpine last year and went to Williams, was like, I don't want to work for someone who only accepts fourth as being the best that they can achieve, kind of thing. So
So let's move. Just the last topic. We'll touch on for this post show. So we did get a while we were talking about Mercedes. We had a comment from Agro Valley Farm. It's either Lewis is losing it or Merck is doing everything for him to have a bad year. Discuss.
Both those statements are wrong. Lewis Hamilton's being restricted by the inhibitions of the car, and Mercedes are unable to get on top of things. They're not doing it deliberately. Because why would they do that? It would just make them look stupid. Why would any team deliberately hamstring one of its drivers, especially a team like Mercedes, big brand, coming off the back of multiple world championships in a row now with a winless season behind it? They need to be strong this year. The car just isn't. This is, I think this is a.
I was going to say they're doing right by each other. Like we saw in the race that even Lewis was just was like, you know, George is faster. Like, should we swap the positions? Well, that's the first one. I don't know if that's how
it makes sense to, because you got to benefit the team. You've got to get the maximum points you can. So
of course, but I'm saying it's not a spiteful relationship between the two at all. Yeah.
So, you know, Mercedes aren't going to be deliberately shooting themselves in the foot. It would just make no sense. It would just be stupid. And Toto Wolff is not that sort of person either. It's just not going to happen.
I think the car's just slow.
The car is. I think the car is just not brilliant. I think we just need to kind of accept right now that Mercedes is just not very good. They haven't been good for 2 years now. They're just they're not going to suddenly just be good again. I think the top five teams are too competitive to just for one of them to suddenly leap to the top. You've got Red Bull, who's there as just a dominant force. Ferrari are getting there, as Aaron was saying. It's taken a whole year of Fred Vasseur to really straighten up this team and give them direction and purpose. And now we're seeing, you know, late on last season, this season, we're starting to see results. And they're still not that, let's face it, the Red Bull in a straight contest is still better. McLaren have been, you know, we saw where they were, but they've chipping away, and Ferrari have already leapfrogged them, so they're still having to catch up again. Aston Martin are still there and thereabouts. There's well, one of their drivers is. The other one is crap. And then there's Mercedes, who, if let's face it, if you're gonna you had to have this big shift in how they were gonna build their car. They're still clearly not understanding it. They're too tough on their tires. They're just high-speed corners, of which we've seen in Saudi, which we saw in here as well, especially Sector 1 in Suzuka. They're just not that great in the high-speed corners. And that's just going to be the way it is until Mercedes find a track and a setup that really actually suits their car. They are going to continue to be off the pace. And that's not Lewis's doing badly. That's not Toto going, right, let's have a terrible season. That's just where Mercedes are at the moment. It's kind of where Red Bull were after their dominancy. They were great up until 2014 and then just dropped, and we just watched years and years of mediocrity where they would sometimes, do well, but for most part, their car was only good around Monaco because that's what it's really built for.
And Mexico.
That's it. And Mexico.
High
Monaco and Mexico would go, okay, Max might have a chance this time. But then the rest of this, they were going to be somewhere podiums or at least fourth, fifth.
It's just a cycle that all teams go through. You saw it with Ferrari after their heyday. You've seen it with McLaren after like the late 90s. They had the fastest car. Then they dropped sort of at one point to the fifth best team in 2004, although that was a car that would just set itself on fire. So that was their own doing. But you see, it's teams and their dominance goes in cycles. You're never going to get, I think, different winners every year. It's never going to be like that unless they start giving them equal or close to equal cars. But F1 is never going to do that, unfortunately. As much as I think it would be great, I think that might be their solution, is to go sort of 50% equal cars. So they all have like a standard chassis or something. But then, you're still going to get a team that develops one part, the part of the car they are allowed to develop, much better than someone else. So you might get even bigger gaps. But, anyway, and just watch F2 if you want close racing.
And that's where I guess you've got to appreciate the brilliance of F1. It gets lost in all the negativity around a certain team dominating, is that, it is a technical sport, and, we often don't, I think, praise enough some of the achievements that, say Adrian Newey or, James Allison have done, Pat Simmons in the past as well. So I think for me, Mercedes, it just kind of hits harder because we went through 8 years of, their dominance on the Constructors' Championship, and it seemed unlikely that after 8 years they were just going to fall off a cliff, which has happened. So, I guess the higher you rise, the harder you're going to fall, and that's what we're seeing with them at the moment. But I also want to understand, why has it gone wrong for them? This is this team that's sustained success for such a long time. Where can you pinpoint the downfall as such? And I agree with all you guys saying you can't say it's anything to do with the drivers or the leadership at Toto Wolff. But also I'm happy to accept that, that's just the cyclical nature of F1, is that we're going to see these cycles where there will be a particular team that is going to be at the forefront, and then everyone else is just going to be playing catch up.
There is a sub-narrative to this, and obviously I hate to sort of harp back and bring it up again, but it comes off the back of Abu Dhabi 21 and everything that happened there. So you've got this other narrative that's around Lewis Hamilton of what happened on that day, and he's not won since. He's got close, but it's not worked out, and now he's moving to Ferrari. So there is so many narratives around the Mercedes story. Like Jawad said, we never envisaged that they would be on top and dominant. And even with Red Bull challenging in 21, you didn't see the fall off that they are going through right now. But it, like you say, Jawad, it is just that cyclical nature. A change of rules, you get it wrong, another team gets it right. I mean, Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari could have all got the 22 regs wrong, and you could have had like Sauber nail it, and all of a sudden Valtteri Bottas is a double world champion, or something weird happens like that. You can have a Brawn story. They happen once a century, if that. So, it's just the way things are. It's the normal cycle. 2026 could reset things, and all of a sudden it's Ferrari and McLaren again, and we're going back to the 80s and the 90s. So it's just the way the sport is sometimes. You get cycles. Look at Manchester City. They're the dominant force in Manchester now. It used to be Manchester United.
Precisely. I think as well, amongst that, going off topic with Mercedes, it's important as fans, I think, to not get sucked into the vacuum of negativity that comes around this. We've watched Formula One for different periods of time, some longer than others, but at the end of the day, that narrative is common, that this is what happens with different eras, different rules, different drivers, and we all just have to give the individual praise where it's due. So, for all the people hating on the Red Bull dominance and the Max dominance, it's like, this is a driver that was prophesized 10 years ago to be the next big thing, and we're kind of living in that era at the moment. And as much as it'd be nice to see varied winners and all that, at the same time, kind of have to sit back and say, wow, this is an amazing driver. Same with Lewis before that, winning his championships with Mercedes and breaking the records or equaling the records that we never thought would be equaled, that Schumacher set back in the 2000s. So it's more, I feel more fascinated than ever by F1 than I do otherwise, or feel negative about it, I feel.
Righty. Well, the sun has actually set now in Japan. I think it's maybe time to let the sun set on this podcast. So thank you for everyone in chat who has got involved, especially Jared. Thank you. Actually, last couple of comments from Callum. Aaron defending Merck for his life. I love it. Fair enough. Also, do Merck need better staff now? Don't know. Ask Owain's friend.
He's left. Well, I mean, he's left. He's in Thailand now, so
so maybe they do. And Jared, team dominance is the nature of F1. It's compounded by Red Bull breaking the rules in the first year of the current spec and receiving no real punishment. They've also been able to use that extra step up to keep ahead for a few years now. That is a conversation for a whole other podcast, I think, Jared.
Yeah. I've got stuff to do today. That'll be far too long.
I've got to sleep tonight.
I've got dinner and sleep.
Open the can of worms.
Okay, so thank you everyone in chat. Thank you for listening. Make sure to catch our preview for the Chinese Grand Prix. That should hopefully be coming out fairly soon. And then, of course, the race in China. We all excited for being back in Shanghai, guys?
Not excited for the 4 a.m. sprint race on Saturday morning. No,
wait, is that 4
that's a Europe problem?
4 a.m. and then qualifying's at 8 a.m.
That sounds like a you problem.
Yeah. Just let us enjoy this one last race at a decent time before we get back into. Then we got Miami,
which
is
Malaysia as well.
Miami, which is 4 a.m. here. For you, Louis, it will be worse, won't it?
Yeah, it's awful. It's even worse.
Miami's at like 9 o'clock at night in the UK. It's not good for anybody.
Nice.
And Vegas is no good for anyone either. Why have we got so many American races?
I quite like it being at 9 o'clock at night. I won't lie.
The night owl, Owain the night owl.
Right. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. Goodbye.
See ya.